Mornstead, a kingdom that echoes with the pangs of tragedy. Cities and castles lie in vacant ruin, inundated by waves of tears and blood. Every tale is somber, every soul pitiful, but distinguished and unparalleled in its fall is that of Judge Cleric, the radiant paragon of the Hallowed Sentinels, whose millennia-long duty has been to preserve the holy beacons that keep a demon god imprisoned. Her failure is sealed with Mornstead's desolation. Her spirit is irreparably frayed. She has become the very enemy she condemns. But how did Cleric reach such a loathsome state? Who was this illustrious hero, and why has she fallen thusly? This is a story of conviction corrupted, of compassion spoiled to callousness, and the depths of self-delusion. A warning that major Lords of the Fallen spoilers are to come. Alright, let's dive in. Judge Cleric is a tale that reaches back lifetimes to days shrouded in myth, to a time roughly 1500 years in the past, when a deer ruled as unquestioned god over the lands of mortals. Though her deeds immortalize her as a rebel, a demigod who defied the will of her lord, Judge Cleric's origins are modest in comparison. Born as a Zell to an impoverished family bound to the land, she was one peasant among thousands who toiled endlessly in the countryside. Want and hunger made constant companions of the girl, but little slivers of happiness shone from heaven upon her, and the foundations of Azel's household were molded from love. The sunflower, a symbolic motif of Judge Cleric which adorns various locales throughout her Empyrean seat of power, and which is manifest in her boss's remembrance. These are remnants carried over from her life as Azel. In spare moments, she and her mother bonded over the flower's admirable beauty. This we hear recollected in the hidden lore attached to the crown of flowers. Although existence was not easy for her peasant family, the young Azel treasured those occasions when she and her mother would pick flowers together in the sunshine, a simpler time before her life became one of duty, power, and sacrifice. These last words foreshadow the import yet to color the girl's future. Here, Azel spends her days, but the girl's idol is fractured when illness befalls her mother. Death enters Azel's home and steals from her a role model, a confidant, a friend. Her mother's passing grieves Azel deeply. A wound festers within. A gaping hole tears her heart. For countless days, despair grips her. Though the pain is indelible upon her soul, perhaps it can be mended. In the Church of a Deer, Azel finds fortitude and solace from her anguish. Religion grounds her, and shortly, the girl's destiny is one attached to the church. She leaves her farm behind to be trained as a disciple versed in a deer's worship. On the day Azel left for the temple where she was to live and train as a priestess of a deer, her father claimed that by the god's grace, her mother's spirit would be watching over her. Azel's life begins afresh. She devotes herself completely to religious studies, wherein she finds God's love. But the pangs of her mother's death still linger. Nightmares lead to heretical prognostications. If a deer so cared for his children, why did he steal her mother from her? These questions are repressed as training and worship bring her closer to a deer, and she imparts his words upon the masses. All that is good is done by his divine will. Azel not only ascends the ranks of acolytes versed in liturgy, but displays inimitable martial prowess. She's quick to join the militant branch of the church, proselytizing wayward souls who dwell in the dangerous marches on civilization's frontier as a warrior priestess. But her skills as both are soon tested in conflict and blood. After untold centuries burdened by their god's lordship, many radicals see a deer not as a benevolent deity, but as an unremitting tyrant whose absolute rule has crushed free will.
Thousands of years of lies. That's what the world's been fed. A deer was no tyrant. He was a shepherd to humanity. We couldn't be trusted. But he was there to guide us, to keep peace and order and justice. Until the fucking judges. They were no heroes, just greedy heretics who turned people against their god. But the stories say different, don't they?
They are nothing but slaves to his whim. Dangerous thoughts of subversion and blasphemy foment across kingdoms, and sporadic resistance erupts in violence. As one devoted to God recalls, how could they start a rebellion against a deer? Before this fire could be extinguished, it spread. It became an uprising against God, the ultimate sin. A deer charges his loyal disciples with quelling disorder, and Azel's sword is soon bloodied by those who once were neighbors. The brutality enacted in God's name, the evil deeds performed at his behest, and horror witnessed weigh heavily on Azel's soul. Her eyes are opened to the truth, and she's disabused of the church's teachings she once extolled. The solace Azel found in worship of a deer would eventually come to an end. The heretics are vindicated. A deer is no magnanimous deity. He is the vile manipulator professed. The hidden lore of Judge Cleric's crown enlightens us. There came a day when the gifted warrior priestess Azel decided she had been living a lie, cast off her crimson attire in disgust, and swore to put an end to a deer's rule, or die in the attempt. Azel lifts her sword among the discontented thousands and joins the revolution against a deer. They soon learn that defiance of a god is no simple matter. These heretics, known as judges, thought they would succeed. The good people prayed, though. They prayed with their priests day and night, and a deer heard them. He sent forth the lords to end the uprising and lead the herd back into his loving arms. Disgusted by the depravity infecting his flock and feeling his control slip, a deer creates the Rogar. Demons formed in his infernal realm as a dark reflection of human emotions: greed, fear, hatred, loathing. He unleashes his Rogar lords and countless legions upon humanity to reclaim what is his by right. Terrible war consumes the mortal realm. In the conflict, innate and powerful abilities that once dwelt dormant within Azel have come to the fore. Inhuman speed, agility, vitality, and mystical powers cascade from an unknown reservoir and confer onto the warrior priestess godlike skill. Her strength wins the field in numerous battles, and her heroism bestows legendary status upon Azel. She becomes humanity's rallying cry, a beacon of hope. Here, in her desire to vanquish a deer, Azel found herself with two unlikely allies: a fierce warrior and a cunning rogue, each of them, like her, extraordinary in his own way. And so the three who would later become known as the Judges declared war against the god. The Judges rose from humankind's ranks as demigods. Their mere presence inspired the masses, turning the tide of war in favor of the rebels. The Chronicle of One Soldier details the Judges' heroism and the devastation that racked the world. As the fire came down, the Judges didn't hesitate. They faced the lords of the god. We all hid wherever we could, but they stayed and fought. When we came out of our hiding, the world was black and dead, but we were still alive, and we knew who we had to thank for it. The Judges' might surpassed the deer's Rogar lords, and in a climactic finale, Azel, now known as Judge Cleric, alongside Judge Warrior and Judge Assassin, severed a deer's connection to the mortal plane, banished his physical form, and exiled the fallen god to his native Rogar realm. Though Cleric and the Judges succeed in overthrowing an immortal tyrant, her duty has just begun, and it's one impossible to fulfill alone. While the other Judges left humanity to decide its own fate, Azel remained. Her upbringing within the Church of a Deer planted within her heart a festering anxiety. She knew the god better than most and beheld his savage rage. She knew he wasn't destroyed and feared his return. Rogar continued to stalk desolate moors in confused, masterless rampage, and the fallen god's sympathizers were legion. To silence the echoes of Adir's lingering influence, Judge Cleric called upon her own growing retinue of devoted followers and war heroes. With sword drawn and on bent knee, she swore 2 solemn oaths. The first, a pledge to the god Aureus, Lord of the Heavens, Justice and Radiant Light. His was a cause worthy of her champion. The second, an oath of unflagging vigilance in guarding humankind from Adir's privations. Through this, Judge Cleric established the Eternal Watch and founded the Order of the Hallowed Sentinels. Their sacred charge? To illuminate the darkness and ruthlessly hunt all remnants of Adir. For centuries, Judge Cleric and the Hallowed Sentinels patrol ceaselessly civilization's frontiers, cast judgment by the sword upon Rogar, and maintain the demon god's exile. Their legend grows with each generation, as does their power. Just then, however, Cataclysm sends shockwaves rippling through the land, and the cords of fear are once again plucked on Cleric's heartstrings. The events of the original Lords of the Fallen transpire. Rogar lords are seen for the first time in many years as the barrier between realms weakens. Adir writhes within his prison, and his influence is again cast upon mortals. Judge Cleric and the Hallowed Sentinels are markedly absent as these dire circumstances consume mankind in war and blood. Doubtless these gallant warriors and their illustrious leader fight with abandon against their ancient enemy in the background, as the lens of the game is focused more acutely on the actions of the playable prisoner-turned-hero, Harkin. Though Harkin ultimately thwarts Adir's physical return, legions of demonic Rogar continue to plague the land, their presence and Adir's influence in the mortal realm preserved through the Rune of Adir, an artifact pulsing with immense Rogar energy born of the god himself and in Harkin's possession. Its existence and legacy will have lasting repercussions in the centuries to come. Judge Cleric is struck deeply by what she feels as failure. Upon her and her Hallowed Sentinels, she feels the blame for this atrocity must rest. In conflict's aftermath, she journeys to the epicenter of Adir's power, the Palm of Adir, in whose mountainous shadow the young kingdom of Mornstead now rests. Her eyes are witness to a broken and deplorable land. Demon god worship lingers in clandestine cult meetings. Monsters prowl the causeways. The Mornstead military lies shattered, and dogmatic, superstitious religions rule thought. If this is the focal point of Adir's relentless machinations, it must be made into an impregnable bastion of vigilant justice to prevent the tyrant's return. Judge Cleric and her Hallowed Sentinels initiate a slow transformation of Mornstead. They invest themselves within the kingdom, excise evil where it lurks, and bring stability to the roiling tumult. Cleric's presence is greeted with fanfare which we hear related in the hidden lore of the tolling spell. When Judge Cleric and the Hallowed Sentinels first arrived in Mornstead, many of its citizens were awed to have such a holy figure in their midst, and eager to learn from her experience and wisdom. Most importantly, Cleric brings with her Aureus' will, and in him she finds the strength to contest Adir. The immaculate paragon of the Sentinels, already with the power of a demigod, is further bestowed with Aureus' radiant blessing. Cleric and her Sentinels charge the land with holy magic and erect the Beacons of the Sentinels within Mornstead. These pillars of divine light are the manacles to bind Adir in eternal slumber and sever his connection to the mortal realm. Thus invigorated, the Beacons and the Sentinels, with Cleric as their shepherd, continue their eternal watch. A sense of peace befalls the kingdom under Judge Cleric's luminous gaze. Faith is restored and radical ideas suppressed. It cannot be said with certainty when, but at some point a stranger, a traveler worn by time and burdened by significance, journeys to Mornstead in hopes of gaining audience with Judge Cleric. Harkin, the hero of old, vilified by false narratives, still has in his possession the corrupting rune of Adir. Its insidious whispers tempt with promises of power. Its seduction is too great for Harkin to bear, but neither can he bring himself to destroy it. Instead, he presents the rune to Judge Cleric, entrusts it to her care, and beseeches her to contain its malevolent aura, or else fracture it entirely. This we see in the Upper Calrath stigma. Now, it could be here, with the realization that Adir's rune exists as the source of the demon god's continued power, that the beacons are erected as a means of mitigating its influence, rather than in the decades prior. Let me know your interpretation in the comments. Regardless, the rune of Adir is symbolic of Judge Cleric's greatest obstacle. Temptation pulls at Azel from deep within, perhaps a lingering desire to restore the god who once held her faith. But this conflicts with the resentment currently borne by Cleric for his lies and torturous ways. This rune, anathema to all she holds dear, nonetheless is the source of her purpose. If it were destroyed, the threat of the demon god's return would dissolve, and with it, the meaning of Cleric and the Sentinels. These deep prognostications fill her mind as the judge holds the rune in her hand. A momentous decision is made, not to destroy the rune, but to act as its custodian. What next follows is a steady, inexorable, and tragic slip into perversion as Adir's rune works to corrupt Judge Cleric and afflict the Hallowed Sentinels with a rot that takes centuries to manifest. At the outset, the beacons of the Sentinels pulse with restraining power around Adir's prison, and his rune is secured behind layers of defenses within the Abbey of the Hallowed Sisters. Fortresses the likes of Judge Cleric's redoubtable Empyrean and the manse of the Hallowed Brothers stand domineering atop the mountains, overlooking the beacons of the Sentinels. The Eternal Watch is fulfilled. Sentinels persecute demon god worshippers and other heresies to Orism. They struggle constantly with Rogar forces, who now direct their energies towards Mornstead and the recapture of their Lord's rune. They protect fiercely the kingdom alongside Mornstead's own forces and the military orders of the Orient Church. But then, disaster strikes to upset this tenuous balance. To Cleric's horror, the rune's aura weakens the foundational magic that empowers the beacons. Their luster fades, and darkness threatens the kingdom. Only through great sacrifice can the beacons be sustained. Latimer, venerated and canonized saint, was the first to understand the price of salvation, and gave his life to invigorate the magic of the beacon, which we see in this stigma.
Latimer, in death may you continue to shine as the radiant paragon you are in life. And may your dedication to our cause be remembered evermore.
Centuries later, and his noble act is still remembered.
Several of our sacred texts tell of Saint Latimer, a noble knight, and most devout follower of Our Lady, canonized after he sacrificed himself to help show the Hallowed Sentinels what was necessary for the greater good. Many have given their lives to sustain the beacons, but Latimer was the first, and remains one of our most venerated figures.
It's unclear when and how often these ritual acts are performed, but over generations, all beacons require mending and must be tended carefully. Cleric herself sacrifices her own hand to restore her Empyrean beacon.
Make your cut, Ermengarde.
Far greater than this disaster is the consequent knowledge that the beacons are fallible, vulnerable to the twistings of a demon god. If the beacons can be stained thusly, no soul is safe from Adir's privations. Again, anxiety cripples Cleric's heart. The judge and her Hallowed Sentinels become victims of increasing fear, paranoia, and contempt as they succumb to a maddening descent exacerbated by Adir's rune. The presence of the rune of Adir poisoned the mind of the cleric as it did so many others, but by that time, hers was already a mind in which watchfulness had become paranoia, Faith had become fanaticism, and strength had become ruthlessness. At Judge Cleric's behest, the Hallowed Sentinels are transformed from holy guardians to ungodly persecutors. They see Rogar blight and sin in the eyes of all. Their methods grow increasingly cruel as they violently suppress deviant thought.
O Hallowed Sentinels, most blessed representatives of the Holy Judge Cleric, my soul soars to see.
Hold your tongue, pilgrim. And on your feet. You are on sacred ground, and we are yet to see whether you are deserving of that honor.
I assure you, I have dedicated my life to the teachings of Judge Cleric. My faith in her and her divine works is boundless.
Pray it is, for our Immaculate Lady's light will lay bare the truth, and in radiance there is judgment.
Barbs and thorns adorn weapons, armor and pendants, and bloodletting proliferates. This sanguine fascination goes beyond what the Church of Aureus teaches, which we hear in the lore of Holy Blood Ring. Over time, the teachings of Judge Cleric gradually placed an even greater emphasis on the importance of blood and its connection to radiant magic than the Church of Orian Radiance ever had. In their slow corruption, the Sentinels turn to more barbaric means of extricating sin and cleansing the soul. Another example in the Bloodletter, a weapon designed to tear flesh and, more importantly, shed blood with each stab and slash. And this doesn't end with armaments. The Sentinels develop new radiant sorceries whose lucent beams now take the form of briars and thorns. All this is to symbolize the derangement consuming the Sentinels and Judge Cleric, instigated by Adir's rune. Where once care and compassion dwelt, only callousness and suffering remain. This desire to inflict pain has a dark reflection within the infernal practices of Adir. The belief that pain brings with it great clarity of mind is one shared by some worshippers of Aureus and Adir alike, the dedicated subjecting themselves to prolonged bodily anguish in an effort to dispel all pretenses and distractions, so that only single-minded devotion remains. The radical fanaticism embraced by Judge Cleric strains the ties she once held with the Church of Orian Radiance, and soon she severs completely the relationship. She denounces the old Orism long held. In its place, a more severe and zealous faith dominates the order, whose sentinels now worship the Immaculate Lady herself as their divine god.
For I have been reborn in the light of our eternal Lady, and proven myself worthy of being counted amongst the ranks of her blessed servants, the Hallowed Sentinels. To her and our holy work do I commit my blood, my life, my future, and my soul, in radiance, judgment.
Prayers and incantations are performed in her name. Her will is the supreme law, her burning judgment final. This crimson and blind dogmatism echoed in the hidden lore of Scourged Sister armor. Considering pain to be a vital connection to the world and thus the cleric's divinity, the Scourged Sisters are ruthless self-flagellators and self-lacerators who wrap themselves in prayer-inscribed bandages and lengths of pliable, thorned metal with equal enthusiasm. Only through violent crackdowns, through unremitting suppression, only by becoming a tyrant and a god can Judge Cleric stave Rogar assault and sustain the radiant beacons. Her ends are just. She recalls like no other can the terrific brutality suffered beneath the heel of Adir.
I've tried, God. You know that better than anyone. I've tried for so long and in so many ways to make these people see that what I do is what's best not just for this kingdom, but the whole world. I know Adir and the Rogar better than anyone, and they have the temerity to question me, to condemn my actions. I wonder what you'd say to me now if you could. I miss your wise counsel. But your presence still brings me strength, and that's what I need now. The strength to do what must be done. I will protect them, even if it has to be from themselves.
In a perverted twist of fate, the rune of Adir has molded Cleric into the very essence of what she long ago overthrew. She has sunken to depravity, her eternal watch blinded by madness, but its past nightmares erased by time that often return to haunt present dreams, and the Cleric has yet further to fall. In the face of overwhelming censorship and Cleric-sponsored oppression, Adir has faded to obscurity, but the god himself remains, and he's not taken exile lightly. He is planned, concocted, and manipulated for centuries to orchestrate a grand return, a destruction of the fetters that bind him, and a ruthless vengeance upon those who stood as his betrayers. The Beacons of the Sentinels possess strong magic, but they cannot restrain a god forever. As he writhes against his chains, they loosen, and although prevented from manifesting physically, he strengthens his insidious aura. A Rogar corruption soon permeates the land, working in subtle ways to stain minds and rend hearts, signs that the demon god's return is nigh. Adir's influence affects all with mutation and delirium. Even the divine ranks of the Hallowed Sentinels and their imperious Judge Cleric are not immune. Fear and paranoia grip Cleric. Have she and her sentinels grown weary in their watch? Has their vigilance wavered? This possibility cannot be countenanced. The judge's eyes conjure false threats in every corner, while at the same time she blinds herself to the truth. Concurrently, sisters and brothers within the Sentinels rebuke the masses, admonish sinners with gruesome resolve. Her order's growing contempt and brutality, displayed in the hidden lore of the Briar Storm sorcery. When an attempt was made on the Cleric's life, the small group of Mornstead citizens accused of the crime were executed by the Hallowed Sentinels via the gradual constriction of enwrapping radiant thorns, a slow and agonizing death. Judge Cleric's outward conviction obfuscates a crippling internal anxiety. What if her power and her beacons were not enough? What if the demon has returned? Rather than confront these pressing questions, Cleric imbibes the draft of self-delusion. Here, we are witness to such blindness when Pietà brings forth dire warnings.
You look exhausted, Pietà. Do you bring any better news?
I'm afraid not, my lady. The number of those affected rises, and all my blood and our healing sorceries can do is offer temporary relief. And little at that. This disease is unnatural, and I believe I know why. My lady, I believe this corruption to be Rogar in nature.
Impossible. The beacons stand, and Adir and the Rogar remain imprisoned.
I assure you,
Continue tending to the ailing as best you can, until you find the true cause of this malady. I have every faith in you.
It's a reality Cleric refuses to admit, doubtless due to the Rogar blight that is already cast upon her mind. Adir's insidious perversion turns Judge Cleric against herself. As fear manifests across Mornstead and occult worship of the demon god returns, the Hallowed Sentinels and Judge Cleric succumb to corruption-induced madness. Ruthless inquisitions are launched to purge the kingdom through blood. The Tower of Penance echoes with the wails of those deemed guilty. The Abbey and the Manse are barred to outsiders, and all unfortunates seeking charity are cast out.
the descrier of the dawn found trespassing will be severely punished for their transgression. This place is now sanctified in the name of Judge Cleric, and no longer a sanctuary for the ignorant and misguided.
Please. This has been our home for generations. We've always kept our hearts open to the Hallowed Sentinels.
Be grateful that by Judge Cleric's mercy, you are allowed to leave with those wayward hearts still beating. Repent, and turn to her for salvation. While you still can.
Thousands of innocents perish in Hallowed Sentinel hysteria. Their barbarity is unforeseen and unfathomable. straining the already thin filament that binds the order to Mornstead's monarchy.
King Bravis, the Hallowed Sentinels must be stopped. We cannot tolerate this any longer. The barbarism they displayed yesterday was only the latest in a long line of offenses. But we all know there will be many more and greater crimes to come. Surely Mornstead has suffered long enough in their shadow.
And what's worse, the Radiant Cleric is nowhere to be seen. In a dire moment of need, she's been whisked off to the Imperium by her warped advisors. Judge Cleric cloistered from reality behind impenetrable walls of stone, her ears recipient of whispered lies adrip with poison.
Sisters, I must see Judge Cleric on a matter of the utmost urgency. Please, stand aside.
Our Immaculate Lady does not wish to be disturbed, Pieta.
This sickness, this corruption, spreading across the kingdom is out of control, and our efforts to cleanse it have devolved into callous butchery. People, including our own brothers and sisters, are suffering and dying.
We speak for Judge Cleric, Pieta. Should she have need of you, you will be summoned. As for those who fall victim to the corruption, perhaps they are merely proving their souls to be undeserving of salvation. After all.
Isolation only exacerbates Cleric's descent into darkness and embitters her to the world. She becomes trapped within her own mind, imprisoned by a deer's delusion. Meanwhile, to the masses that once bestowed their faith upon her, the judge has become little more than a wraith, a memory of justice. The pyroclastic stone Inferno sorcery recounts her distressing state. In a lifespan covering millennia, one's downfall might be both gradual and far indeed, and certainly the ancient and callous Judge Cleric, who stood atop the roof of a ruined kingdom, was but a twisted, unrecognizable shadow of her former self. Sentinel violence over generations pushes Mornstead away from Aureus' light and into a deer's dark clutches. Worship of the demon god gains traction among many discontented families and those wishing to preserve themselves against Cleric's inquisitions, most significantly within the kingdom's own royal family. Queen Sophicia embraces the warmth of the demon god to save herself, her husband, and her young prince, but falls to his manipulations. A dark bargain is struck, vile incantations whispered, and Queen Sophicia corrupts the hallowed beacons of the Sentinels completely with a deer's magic. Mornstead is consigned to desolation. The collapse of the beacons destroys what little humanity remained in Cleric, dissolves what sanity she still held onto, and lays bare her very soul to endure the full force of the rune's influence. Rogar armies are invigorated. Corruption and blight rampage through the masses, transforming thousands into mutated, crazed abominations, and the kingdom burns with rage and spite. A second climactic moment arises in Judge Cleric's life. A brief opportunity breathes hope into Mornstead's parlous state. She has in her grasp a means of destroying Adir's machinations, of ensuring his exile. But with the tyrant's malfeasance so near, with the singularity of Rogar blight oppressing her very being, Judge Cleric's vulnerable psyche is shattered into 1,000 pieces, and she turns her back to the light. The rune festers within the haunting abbey of Hallowed Sisters, its rotting influence the impetus for heinous acts perpetrated by the Sentinels. The chamber in which it stands is stained crimson as severed hands adorn altarpieces and bodies of the guilty hang mutilated above pools of gore. This scene, a grotesque symbol of what has happened not only to the Holy Sentinels, but also Cleric's once stalwart heart. Yet disillusion is a powerful force. Though the Radiant Cleric has descended to depths beyond redemption, her will is adamant. She still fights with superhuman tenacity against the demon god and his agents. thousands of years have shaped an enemy not easily forgotten. Truth is a concept difficult to stomach, and for years, Cleric has lied and blamed in its avoidance. Though she has long been reluctant to act against Rogar perversion, for that requires admission of truth and with it, complicit guilt, Judge Cleric is stirred to reproach. She unleashes the full might of her deranged sentinels who ravage the kingdom in holy fervor, who raze cities to the ground and slaughter indiscriminately. In her twisted state, however, she cannot distinguish adversary from ally. A crazed delirium consumes her and her order. War is declared. Those not among the Hallowed Sentinels must be heretics and will feel Cleric's radiant judgment. Mornstead reels from blasphemy and crusade as Rogar demons and sentinels alike sunder the enfeebled kingdom. As the Lampbearer journeys across this broken land, charged with cleansing the now stained beacons of the Sentinels, they must confront the truth and face Judge Cleric within her Empyrean. Vainglory and self-deceit project Cleric as the illustrious and incorruptible paragon of justice. But stripped of this veneer, we are enlightened to her pitiable fate.
I will incinerate your soul with holy fire for this profanation. Lowly blasphemer!
Manipulation has transformed the Cleric into a deer's unwitting pawn. By her own hands, she has strengthened her ancient enemy. She is complicit in his resurrection. That Cleric has embraced fully Rogar energies seething within her is apparent in her mastery of inferno magic used to charge her attacks, and in the red-hot gleam of eyes studding a fallen countenance. The reality? Cleric has become the very enemy she swore to eradicate, the sorrow amplified by her inability to realize it. Two endings lie before crestfallen Cleric, dependent entirely on the Lampbearer's actions. If the Deathless One is an agent of Aureus or the Putrid Mother, Judge Cleric remains by her beacon defeated and dejected, until the gods consume her. If, however, the Lampbearer distinguishes themselves as a fallen lord and disciple of a deer, Judge Cleric faces a fate worse than death. With the rune of a deer, invigorated by the demon god, they enter the judge's mind. Here, they are presented with the untrammeled memories of her past life. Azelle, the peasant girl, still dwells within an idyllic dream nestled deep in Judge Cleric's psyche. Here is the vulnerable essence of a deer's ancient jailer. Here, the god relishes in spite. With the rune, Azelle is symbolically slain, exiled from Cleric's body, which is then possessed by the demon god himself. The greatest torment is that a fragment of her will might remain, a prisoner within a body no longer hers, forced to endure eternal torment as a deer rises and a second age of dark tyranny is cast upon the land. Her effort and her life reduced to nothing. So ends the story of Azelle, warrior priestess, god slayer, hallowed sentinel, and radiant judge. Hers is a tale that has spanned millennia, one of disillusion and enlightenment, of heroism and barbarity, of illustrious rise and precipitous fall. She freed humanity from a spiteful god's rule. She watched for centuries over his prison, but in the end, her conviction faltered. Her resolve broke, and in her derangement, she embodied the base evil she longed to destroy. The legacy of Judge Cleric is stained Rogar red, the innocent blood of thousands on her callous hands. Thanks so much for watching and listening to this video on the story of Azelle, the Radiant Judge Cleric. Let me know your thoughts on Azelle, the Hallowed Sentinels, and her fall from grace, as well as your own insights and suggestions for future videos in the comments below. And if you're a fan of lore and storytelling, be sure to subscribe to the channel, check out the podcast where content is uploaded frequently. I want to thank my amazing supporters over on Patreon who make all of this possible, and I couldn't do it without their fantastic support. If you'd like to become a lore luminary for access to me, a great community, written scripts, and early video drops, head to patreon.com/thelorebrarians to learn more. Until next time, go forth and explore the lore.